Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome to today's newspaper review. I'm Chidera Esum, and I'll be taking you through the headlines. First, The Punch. Boldly written, APC consensus push faces resistance in states. You'll find that on page 2 and 7 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, Sunbed to lodge 70,000 empty cocoa, 80,000 empty cashew processing plants in March 2027. You'll find that on page 25 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, First hold core profits rocket 72.2% in Q1. You'll find that on page 27 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Jonathan considers comeback as court hears eligibility suit today. You'll find that on page 8 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Vanguard, boldly written, FG moved to evacuate Nigerians from South Africa. You'll find out on page 5 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, First host company profits rocket 72.2% in Q1. You'll find that on page 3 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, how I'm handling LG autonomy, says Kifas. You'll find that on page 9 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, oil price drops. Marketers keep pump price high. You'll find that on page 19 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Guardian, boldly written, how skilled process makes live benchers of football administrators. You find that on page 4 and 5 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, First hold company PLC profits rocket 72.2% in Q1. You find that on page 10 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, APC paves Tinubu's 2027 run as opposition battles INEC timelines lawsuit. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Jonathan explores options as court faces today for suits on his eligibility. You find that on page 7 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Sun, boldly written, I'm consulting widely on 2027 presidential race, says Jonathan. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, APC governors, I will deliver Tinubu in 2027, says Uzodinma. You find that on page 8 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, IMF fears AI cyber attacks could cripple global financial system. You'll find that on page 25 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, gunmen adopt 6 Nasarawa varsity students. At the bottom of the newspaper, gunmen adopt 6 Nasarawa varsity students. You'll find that on page 4 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Senate moves to cut off tribunal presidential election litigation. You'll find out on page 6 of the newspaper. Still in the newspaper, court convicts ex-power minister Mamman in absentia over 33.8 billion naira fraud, orders his arrest. You'll find out on page 8 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Trust, boldly written, 33.8 billion naira fraud conviction revives Mambila scandal. You find out on page 3 and 6 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, Senate revises leadership eligibility rule. You find out on page 3 of the newspaper. Still at the top of the newspaper, Shettima leads 12 governors to submit Tinubu's forms. You find out on page 11 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, how Jonathan's presidential bid resurfaced. You find out on page 5 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, Bello Aero fights defection. What changed? You find out on page 12 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Nigerian exporters embrace China's zero tariff policy with caution. You find out on page 7 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Independent, boldly written, I will consult widely before making a decision, says Jonathan. At the top of the newspaper, subscribers lament network woes despite NCC compensation orders. Still in the same newspaper, FG hits on migrating NECO to CBT exam mode by 2027. At the bottom of the newspaper, Senate rescinds ban on first-time senators seeking presiding offices. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, Shettima submits Tinubu nomination forms to APC. You'll find that on page 6 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Nigerian Tribune, boldly written, uncertainty over Jonathan's links to 2027 presidential contest. You find that on page 4 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, first hold company profits rocket 72.2% in Q1. You'll find that on page 7 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, defection hits PDP in Uyo. You find out on page 3 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, court convicts ex-power minister Saleh over 33.8 billion naira fraud. You find out on page 2 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, billionaire drug baron, 2 female kingpins fall in global sting operation. Away from that newspaper to the New Telegraph, boldly written, INEC demands security risk analysis of potential flashpoints. INEC demands security risk analysis of potential flashpoints. At the top of the newspaper, poor tax reforms implementation strangulating SMEs. Still at the top of the newspaper, promotion crisis draws BPE as senior directors petition Shettima. You find that on page 7 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Senate restores old procedure of electing presiding officers. You find that on page 3, 2, and 4 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, Rep sets up panel to probe debt owed FG. You find that on page 3 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, experts cautions against excess consumption of soursop leaves. You find out on page 30 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to First Daily, boldly written, I will consult widely before declaring presidential bid. At the top of the newspaper, police urge Nigerians to report officers' misconduct. At the bottom of the newspaper, Nigerian billionaire drug baron, 2 female kingpins nabbed in global sting. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, Tinubu redeploys Fani Kayode from Germany to South Africa. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, Senate scraps standing orders after constitutional clash. Still in the same newspaper, troops rescued 9 kidnapped victims, arrest arms courier in Kogi. And that's all for today's newspaper review. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more updates. I'm Chidera Esum. Do have a beautiful day.